The Man from Taured. In July 1954, a neatly dressed Caucasian man stepped up to customs at Haneda Airport in Tokyo. When asked for his country of origin, he presented a legitimate government-issued passport from a European nation called Taured. The customs officers were baffled. The man pointed to a map indicating his home was nestled between France and Spain, where the Principality of Andorra sits. He claimed his country had existed for 1,000 years. His passport was covered in authentic-looking visa stamps from his previous travels across the globe, including Tokyo. He carried a checkbook from an unknown bank and possessed legally binding international driver's licenses. Held overnight in a high-security hotel room guarded by Japanese immigration officials, the man and all of his documentation vanished by morning. This is the internet legend of the Man from Taured. We start our audit here because the forensic debunking of this case is where the true anomaly begins. For decades, this story fueled parallel universe theories. Recently, historical audits uncovered the truth. The man was actually John Allen Zagris, a highly sophisticated con artist arrested in Tokyo in 1960 for cashing forged checks. The mystery was solved. The timeline was secure. But here is the odd residue that cannot be explained. The 2025 John Zagris update reveals the real document story. When Zagris was prosecuted, the Japanese courts were genuinely paralyzed. He didn't just have a fake passport, he had invented an entire linguistic framework. He spoke a language that linguists could not identify, wrote in a script that matched no known alphabet, and possessed documentation manufactured with a level of cryptographic sophistication that outpaced 1960s forgery techniques. He wasn't just printing fake ink, he was operating within a closed-loop system of logic that only applied to a world that didn't exist. If Zagris was simply a grifter, why construct an identity so spectacularly flawed that it guaranteed immediate detention? The anomaly isn't that he slipped between dimensions, it's that his brain was running the operating system of a different timeline. He was a human rendering error, executing code for a server he was no longer connected to.
Rudolph Fentz. In June 1950, a man materialized in the middle of an intersection in Times Square, New York. He was wearing late 19th century clothing, a black broadcloth suit, a tall silk hat, and a thick overcoat, despite the summer heat. Panicked by the roaring combustion engines and neon lights, he darted into traffic and was instantly struck and killed by a taxi. When the NYPD searched his pockets, the forensic timeline shattered. They found 19th century currency without a trace of modern fading, a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage, a brass slug for a 5-cent beer, and a letter sent to an address in Philadelphia, dated June 1876. The name on the letter was Rudolph Fentz. This is the story of Rudolph Fentz, the man from 1876 who appeared in Times Square in 1950. The standard debunking protocol swiftly kills this ghost story. The tale originates almost word for word from a 1951 science fiction short story titled I'm Scared by Jack Finney. It's a work of fiction that mutated into an urban legend through the telephone game of early paranorman zines. Case closed. Yet, the forensic residue refuses to wash away. Decades later, independent researchers digging through archival microfiche of missing persons reports from 1876 discovered a terrifying footnote. There was a real Rudolph Fentz. He vanished without a trace in 1876, matching the exact physical description of the man in Finney's story. When Finney was questioned about this before his death, he claimed he completely fabricated the name. We are left with a paradoxical feedback loop. Did a science fiction author accidentally name a real missing person from 70 years prior? Or does the human collective consciousness, through sheer narrative willpower, force the simulation to manifest fiction into our physical reality? If reality is a rendered engine, perhaps Jack Finney didn't invent Rudolph Fentz. Perhaps his brain simply accessed a corrupted memory file from a previous save state. Time is a file that occasionally gets corrupted.
The 1941 Hipster. In a photograph taken in 1941 at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in British Columbia, Canada, a crowd stands observing the ceremony. Amidst the fedoras, tailored suits, and period-appropriate dresses, one figure violently breaks the immersion of the era. He is wearing wrap-around modern sunglasses, a printed graphic t-shirt under a zip-up cardigan, and he is holding what appears to be a compact portable camera.
This is the 1941 Hipster, and analyzing the tech and clothes in the Southbridge photo has become a cornerstone of temporal anomaly research. Skeptics immediately dismantle the visual anomaly. The sunglasses? They are goggles with side shields, available in the 1920s. The printed t-shirt? It's a sewn-on emblem, likely for a local hockey team like the Montreal Maroons. The camera? A folding pocket Kodak, commercially available since 1914. Every single item on this man can, with enough historical stretching, be localized to the early 1940s. But the debunking misses the core psychological glitch, the odd residue. It is not the existence of the items, it is the statistical impossibility of the aesthetic cluster. The man is exhibiting a posture, a styling, and a combinatorial fashion sense that doesn't algorithmically belong in that era. In a crowd of people conforming rigidly to the social physics of 1941, he is rendering with the swagger of a 2010s digital nomad. It's what network theorists call anachronistic clustering. He looks like a beta tester who spawned into a historical map but forgot to equip the correct localized skin. The camera captures him perfectly, yet the people standing shoulder to shoulder with him seem completely oblivious to his visual dissonance. He is a ghost in the machine, proving that while you can trace the hardware back to 1941, the software running that specific human was compiled decades later.
The 1928 cell phone. In 2010, an Irish filmmaker was watching the DVD extras of Charlie Chaplin's 1928 film, The Circus. Included in the archival footage was a shot of people walking outside the film's Hollywood premiere. For a brief few seconds, a woman in a heavy coat and hat walks through the frame. She has a black rectangular box pressed tightly against her ear, and she is clearly engaged in a lively conversation, laughing and pausing as if listening to a response. This is the famous 1928 cell phone footage featuring the woman talking into a black box. The forensic debunking is quick and clinical. She is not holding a cellular device. She is holding a 1920s Siemens acoustic ear trumpet, an early hearing aid designed to look like a small black purse or rectangular box. She is simply holding it up to amplify the ambient sounds of the premiere. But the odd residue is deafening. Watch the footage again. An ear trumpet only works if you are pointing it at the source of the sound you wish to hear. She is walking alone. There's no one beside her. There's no one in front of her. Yet her mouth is moving in the distinct cadence of a two-way dialogue. She smiles, she nods, she speaks. If she is using a hearing aid, who is she talking to? The clinical explanation demands we accept that she is suffering from a public schizophrenic episode, talking to herself while simultaneously trying to amplify the voices in her own head. The alternative is far more terrifying. If time is a concurrent loop, all moments are happening simultaneously, stacked on top of each other like transparent layers in an editing timeline. What if the black box isn't transmitting a cellular signal through space, but acoustic data through the layers of the render?
Andrew Carlson. In early 2003, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, reportedly detained a 44-year-old man for insider trading. Over a 2-week period, this individual made 126 high-risk stock trades, successfully turning a meager $800 investment into a liquid portfolio worth over $350 million. Every single trade was flawless. When interrogated, he didn't confess to corporate espionage or wire fraud. Instead, he offered a plea deal. He would provide the location of Osama bin Laden and the cure for AIDS in exchange for a quiet release. His explanation for his market prescience? He was Andrew Carlson, the $800 to hundreds of millions stock trader, and he had traveled back in time from the year 2256. The debunking of this event is legendary. The story first appeared in the Weekly World News, a satirical tabloid famous for publishing articles about alien senators and bat boys. It was a joke, picked up by Yahoo News and circulated globally as fact. But the forensic anomaly kicks in when you try to trace the origin of the fiction. After the story went viral, independent journalists attempted to find the satirical author who penned the piece. They couldn't. Furthermore, deep-dive background checks revealed absolutely zero public records, birth certificates, or financial footprints for an Andrew Carlson existing anywhere in the United States prior to December 2002. Then, shortly after his supposed arrest and the publication of the article, a mystery benefactor reportedly posted a $1 million bail. Carlson walked out of a holding facility and ceased to exist.
If he was just a fictional character in a tabloid, why were real financial tracking systems flagging ghost trades matching his exact described portfolio? The odd residue suggests that Carlson was real. He triggered an economic safeguard algorithm by extracting too much capital too quickly, and the system patched the timeline by leaking his story to a satirical newspaper to discredit his existence. The simulation doesn't erase you, it just turns you into a joke so nobody looks closer.
The Bold Street Time Slips. Liverpool, England. Bold Street is a busy modern commercial district, but over the last 2 decades, it has become the epicenter of a localized glitch. Multiple unconnected individuals have filed official police reports detailing a terrifying phenomenon. They are walking down Bold Street, the ambient noise of traffic suddenly drops to a dead, muffled silence, and the modern storefronts warp. Within seconds, they find themselves walking in the 1950s. The Bold Street time slips involve people walking into 1950s Liverpool. Women wear headscarves, men wear trench coats, and modern shops are replaced by long-defunct businesses like Cripps and Dillon's Bookshop. The forensic debunking attributes this to a psychological phenomenon known as environmental memory contamination. Liverpool heavily leans into its historical aesthetic. The brain, processing retro advertisements and old architecture, enters a state of mild dissociation, hallucinating a past that matches the visual triggers. But the residue cannot be dismissed as mere daydreaming. In 1996, a former police officer named Frank suffered a slip. He didn't just see the 1950s, he interacted with it. He tried to enter a bookstore he didn't recognize, following a woman in a 1950s dress. When he crossed the threshold, the environment violently snapped back to 1996, and the bookstore was revealed to be a modern women's clothing store. But Frank had noted the name on the old bookstore, Dillon's. He researched it. Dillon's was a real bookstore on that exact spot, but it hadn't existed there for decades. Furthermore, other victims of the Bold Street glitch have attempted to purchase items during their slips, only to have their modern currency rejected by confused vintage clothes shopkeepers. This isn't hallucination. This is a rendering engine failing to manage its geographic assets. In video game design, this is called a frustum culling failure, when the engine accidentally loads a previous level's architecture into the current map. Bold Street is a weak point in the server where the past hasn't been properly deleted.
The Moberly-Jourdain Incident. On August 10, 1901, 2 highly educated Oxford academics, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, were walking through the gardens of the Petit Trianon at the Palace of Versailles. As they wandered, a deep feeling of oppression and gloom fell over them. The landscape flattened. They encountered men wearing 3-cornered hats, a woman sketching on the grass in an archaic dress, and buildings they couldn't identify. They later concluded they had witnessed the grounds exactly as they were in 1789, right before the French Revolution. The Moberly-Jourdain incident, where 2 teachers walked into the French Revolution, remains the most thoroughly documented time slip in history. The debunking is brutal. Critics argue that the 2 women simply wandered into a historical reenactment or stumbled upon the eccentric bohemian poet Robert de Montesquieu, who was known to hold period piece parties on the grounds. Their subsequent book and adventure was dismissed as a shared folie à deux, amplified by retroactive memory embellishment. But the forensic residue lies in the cartography. When Moberly and Jourdain wrote their accounts, they drew detailed maps of the paths they took, noting specific bridges, ravines, and outbuildings they passed. In 1901, historians mocked them because those topographical features did not exist at Versailles. It was proof of their delusion. However, decades later, hidden archival maps from the 18th century were discovered. The maps proved that every single bridge, ravine, and outbuilding the women drew had actually existed in 1789, but had been entirely destroyed and landscaped over long before 1901. There was no physical way for them to know that geography. The brain is not just a hard drive, it is an antenna. On that day in August, 2 highly tuned academic minds accidentally dialed into the wrong temporal frequency, downloading a 120-year-old architectural schematic directly from the simulation's cloud storage. The 2025 Ghost Signal. We conclude our audit with the most recent and disturbing piece of data. In early 2025, amateur ham radio operators and digital signal processing experts began reporting a massive anomaly. Modern, highly calibrated digital receivers were picking up a clean, localized amplitude modulation (AM) broadcast. The content? A looping news report and jazz broadcast definitively dated to the winter of 1940. This is the 2025 Ghost Signal, a radio broadcast from 1940 caught on modern digital receivers. The forensic debunking initially pointed to the ionosphere. Radio waves can bounce off the charged layers of our atmosphere. Under highly specific, mathematically rare conditions, a signal can be trapped in an ionospheric loop, echoing back to Earth decades later. Alternatively, it was classified as a sophisticated pirate radio hoax, someone intentionally broadcasting vintage audio to troll the digital airwaves. But the odd residue broke the physics engine. A group of researchers in Northern Europe didn't just listen to the 1940 broadcast, they transmitted a digital ping back on the exact same frequency. The vintage broadcast stopped. The 1940 announcer paused, dead air filling the static, before a confused voice asked, "Who is on this line?" The signal wasn't a decaying echo bouncing off the sky. It was live. It was concurrent. For 47 seconds, a two-way data bridge opened between 2025 and 1940, completely bypassing the linear constraints of time. The connection severed abruptly, leaving only white noise. If time is a flowing river, you cannot swim upstream to speak to the water that has already passed. But if time is a file that occasionally gets corrupted, then 1940 and 2025 are just two different folders sitting on the same hard drive. And in 2025, somebody accidentally merged the directories.